Hi everyone, and welcome back to the Living Well with Schizophrenia YouTube channel. If you're new here, my name is Lauren and I make videos about what it's like living with schizophrenia or schizoaffective disorder in my case. And in today's video, I'm going to be talking about whether or not A Beautiful Mind is an accurate portrayal of schizophrenia. A Beautiful Mind is kind of one of the first things that people think about when they hear schizophrenia because it's a really well-known film that was made in 2001 about a famous person, John Nash, who was living with schizophrenia. Now, John Nash is a famous American mathematician who became famous for his work around game theory. He went to school in the 1950s, and so that's when the film is kind of set in. And it kind of takes you on the journey of him being diagnosed with schizophrenia and then living with it and still trying to make his life work in a meaningful way with the diagnosis. And so in today's video, I'm going to be kind of dissecting parts and clips of the film and kind of giving you some insight into my thoughts on the accuracy of the portrayal at different points throughout the film. And then I'm going to give kind of an overall view of the accuracy of the film and what it means for how schizophrenia is portrayed in the media. But before I dive into all of that, I also just want to take this opportunity to encourage you to subscribe to our channel and to turn on the bell notification so as not to miss any future videos from us. Also, if you would like to help support the creation of future videos like this one, please check out our Patreon page. The link is in the description below. We're working really hard to keep creating valuable resources for you all, and we would really appreciate any support you can give. Thank you. Okay, so now I'm going to be showing you different clips from the movie that I feel are important to discuss, and also I guess just a spoiler alert that I am going to be showing clips throughout the whole movie, so if you haven't had a chance to watch it yet and don't want it to be spoiled, make sure to go watch it first, because I am going to be showing clips from the movie.
Used to being picked first.
Okay, so here we see John Nash, and he is starting his graduate degree in mathematics at Princeton University, and he's at some kind of meet and greet, and he's noticing, like...
There could be a mathematical explanation for how bad your tie is.
He's noticing patterns that maybe don't actually mean anything, and that he's attributing maybe more meaning to than is really necessary, and making those kind of like loose associations about things being meaningful, which is kind of accurate. I think that happens for a lot of people who are living with the illness, where they see patterns that have special significance to them or special meaning to them that maybe wouldn't otherwise for other people. And then he also made kind of a mean joke. I thought it was really funny, but he made a bit of a off-tone joke to a new peer. And so I don't know, for me, that's kind of accurate. I kind of lack social skills sometimes at times, and I'm kind of like brutally honest in terms of my humor and the way I interact with people. I don't know if that's a part of schizophrenia, but I guess I relate in that sense.
Yeah, I'll take another.
Excuse me?
1,000 pardons, I simply assumed you were the waiter.
Play nice, Hanson.
Nice is not Hanson's strong suit.
An honest mistake.
Well, Martin Hanson. It is Martin, isn't it?
Oh yes, John, it is.
I imagine you're getting quite used to miscalculation. I've read your preprints. Both of them. One on Nazi ciphers and the other one on nonlinear equations. And I am supremely confident that there is not a single seminal or innovative idea in either one of them. Enjoy your punch.
Gentlemen, meet John Nash, the mysterious West Virginia genius, the other winner of the Distinguished Carnegie Scholarship.
Okay, so this is kind of another kind of comical example of his brutal honesty, which again, I'm not sure if it's a symptom of schizophrenia, but again, it is something that I have as well. Also, they kind of introduce him in this clip as a genius, and I think that there lies a little bit of a problem in that portrayal. Yes, John Nash was a genius, but if this is one of the only representations that people really have in popular media of schizophrenia, they might make, and often people do, make the assumption that everyone who has schizophrenia is a genius of some kind, just a misunderstood genius. And that's a kind of a harmful trope that is not really accurate because anyone can get schizophrenia. You don't have to be of high intelligence or anything like that. There are lots of people with lower intelligence who have schizophrenia. Likewise, there are people with mid-intelligence who have schizophrenia and people with higher intelligence who have schizophrenia. It's a brain disease that does not discriminate based on things like intelligence. Okay, so now we are going to see one of his, spoiler alert, hallucinations that we haven't really understood yet are a hallucination. He was introduced in another clip of the film, but this is the first one that we wanted to show you because, let's just listen quickly, but he's interacting with his hallucination like it's a real person and like it's really there.
And this here is a woman who was chasing a man who stole her purse.
John, you watched a mugging. That's weird.
In competitive behavior, someone always loses.
Well, my niece knows that, John, and she's about this high.
See, if I could derive an equilibrium, where prevalence is a non-singular event, where nobody loses, you imagine the effect that would have on conflict scenarios and
When did you last eat?
negotiations.
When did you last eat?
So I thought this was kind of interesting because his hallucination or delusion is really looking out for him, and it's kind of a positive influence, checking in on his self-care and like if he's eaten or if he's slept or, you know, looking after him in that sense. So I think I want to start off by addressing this clip in the sense of, for me personally, it may be different for other people who have schizophrenia, but for me personally, I don't typically have elaborate visual hallucinations, which I talk to and interact with. Usually it's just audio hallucinations for me. So this is not accurate for me, but I know that there are people who do experience this. So sure, accurate for some people. And then also for me, my hallucinations are typically either neutral or more negative. And maybe I've read a lot about that being a very like North American thing and about different cultures having different experiences of voices and of hallucinations and that kind of thing. So I think there is a broad range of types of hallucinations that people experience, but I just thought it was interesting that they had one portrayed in this video that was looking out for him. Also, doing more research into John Nash's experience of schizophrenia, we found that he primarily had audio hallucinations as well. He didn't really have as much of the visual hallucination. So this is kind of an example of where the film and the director is kind of taking creative license in terms of representing what his experience was like.
Maybe you want to buy me a drink.
So this is kind of another like comical point in the film where he was encouraged to go talk to this pretty blonde, and he just sits down and doesn't really say anything. And that's kind of, I can relate because a lot of times, especially in a high stress situation like that, like approaching a potential mate, you get wrapped up in your own thoughts and you can't really keep up with your thoughts. And so you just go silent, and it's weird for the other person, but it makes sense based on what you're experiencing in your head. So I'm assuming that's kind of what they were trying to portray with this.
I don't exactly know what I'm required to say in order for you to have intercourse with me. But could we assume that I've said all that? I mean, essentially we're talking about fluid exchange, right? So could we just go straight to the sex?
Oh, that was sweet. Have a nice night.
Okay, so this is another comical example of like the brutal bluntness that he is exhibiting, which again, I can relate to on a lesser extreme level than this. I don't think I've ever been quite so forward in a social interaction, and that may just be part of his personality too. It doesn't necessarily have to be because of the mental illness that he has. But I think that it's important to kind of understand that abstract thought is really hard for somebody who has schizophrenia. And that's something that I struggle with too. And so thinking about it from an abstract perspective of engaging in a social interaction with someone can be a little bit difficult sometimes. And so you saw him kind of just cut to the chase and be really direct in terms of what he wanted and what he wanted to accomplish in that interaction. So maybe part of schizophrenia, maybe just his personality, I don't know, but that's kind of interesting to note.
Well, try saying accomplishment. John, you haven't focused.
I'm sorry, but up to this point, your record doesn't warrant any placement at all.
Good day.
So just before this interaction with his professor, where he's talking in this this room, they were talking about how he has been skipping classes and not attending classes and just kind of having kind of subpar performance in school. And so this is pretty accurate because he's kind of in the prodromal phase right now of the illness where, symptoms are just starting to come about. And that is often a time where it's undiagnosed. And so they just, for no apparent reason, begin to slip in things like school and things like work and those kind of demanding parts of life. And that definitely happened for me in my prodromal phase and the early stages of my illness, and actually throughout my whole illness. I've had a hard time keeping up with schoolwork, and I've had professors come to me with concerns about my performance and that kind of thing. So this is pretty accurate.
Deep breaths.
Nash, you might want to stop shuffling your papers for 5 seconds.
I will not buy you gentlemen beer.
Oh, we're not here for beer, my friend.
Oh. Does anyone else feel she should be moving in slow motion?
Will she want a large wedding, you think?
Should we say swords, gentlemen? Pistols at dawn?
Have you remembered nothing? Recall the lessons of Adam Smith, the father of modern economics.
In competition, individual ambition serves the common good.
Exactly.
Every man for himself, gentlemen.
Okay, so this is just kind of another example in the movie of the people around him making a really big effort to keep including him in social interactions and to be his friend. And so I really, really hope that this was the case for John Nash. And I hope that it's the case for a lot of people who are living with schizophrenia. But unfortunately, it's a sad reality that this is kind of a luxury that a lot of people with schizophrenia aren't necessarily afforded in terms of having really strong social connections and people who are wanting to keep pursuing being a friend with them, even though sometimes they are not really able to reciprocate, or they are looking a little quirky to outside observers, or they are, off in their own world kind of thing. And having these people who are continually trying to engage him and trying to be his friend and be a supportive person in his life is really, really wonderful and ends up being a really strong protective factor for him in the long run. So this is another one of his hallucinations or delusions that he interacts with.
Well, there are certain endeavors where your lack of personal connection would be considered an advantage.
They're like some kind of government agent or something that he's
They know me.
working for.
Have you ever been here?
We were told during our initial briefing that these warehouses were abandoned.
That's not precisely accurate.
So he says that these buildings he thought were abandoned, and so that's kind of hinting that they are actually abandoned and that none of this actually exists. And so this is very, very elaborate in terms of creating a whole elaborate world with different people and different tangible things in it. And so I think for me, from my experience, this is a little bit of a stretch in terms of I don't actually see these created environments and these created people and whatnot. It's more that these things play out as delusions. And I think false memories are something that would be important to talk about in terms of feeding the delusions that you have around a particular storyline. And so this might be like a false memory that he has created for himself, that he remembers this happening and whatnot, and that is feeding his delusion instead of walking into this building and experiencing this like this. I think that's a little bit sensationalized. Now, I understand that it's really hard to communicate a false memory or that kind of concept through film. And so again, this is kind of them taking creative license to really allow the viewer to understand how real it feels for the person who's experiencing it. So this probably isn't the way John Nash actually experienced it, but it does help to communicate how real it felt for him, these storylines and these delusions that he was experiencing. Okay, so he's been told by his hallucinations that they are going to be communicating him through codes in different news medias and that kind of thing. So this is kind of what we're seeing right now, where he's starting to associate meaning to these codes that he's seeing in newspaper articles and whatnot. And so this is a little embarrassing because it's very, very like stereotypical schizophrenia, like cutting up, you know, newspaper articles and scattering them around you and being really invested in whatever it is that you are thinking the meaning lies in your own head. And like, I'm embarrassed because I've done this. I have had medical documents all around me in a public washroom and been highlighting things and making connections and moving things based on those connections. And so this is probably kind of accurate because I've experienced that, and I know that there are other people who have experienced this too. It's also kind of interesting to note in this film that he actually does work on some classified work for his job that he works at the university for and with the government and whatnot. And so it's interesting how his delusions are kind of being fed by his real life narratives. And so when that happens for somebody who's living with schizophrenia, it becomes even more difficult to kind of differentiate between what is real and what is not, and what is in your head and what is not. And so I think watching him slip quite deeply into this is probably pretty accurate in terms of how easily it would be to, take what's in his real life and kind of warp it into his delusion, and having a hard time differentiating between the two. So we haven't introduced it yet, but he met one of his students and started dating them, Alicia. And so this is them, their relationship kind of progressed through the movie, and then this is them getting married. And you know, his symptoms have also been progressing, and we're going to see him kind of interacting with one of the hallucinations right away. But I'm not sure that this is entirely accurate, because it's hard to get close to somebody when you're really symptomatic. And if he's having debilitating symptoms or like, you know, really serious symptoms, there he's interacting with the hallucination there. If you're having really strong symptoms, it would be really hard to get close to somebody like you would need to be close to in order to get married. Like, I'm sure they're pretty close. It would be hard to get that close to somebody without them noticing anything is awry or anything is, you know, different or concerning. And so, I don't know. I don't think that I would have been able to just completely ignore my symptoms getting to know my partner, Rob. You know, he started seeing things that were different or of concern or whatnot when I was becoming symptomatic with him. And so I'm not sure how accurate it is for them to have been able to get to the point of marriage without her noticing anything, because he was having quite serious symptoms up to that point. Okay, so this is part of his delusion where he thinks he's dropping off top secret government documents to this house. And then this is one of his hallucinations again. telling him to get into the car, and they engage in this really intense car chase. And, you know, this is quite clearly full-on psychosis at this point. And, you know, it's quite extreme and very detailed, and he's very, very scared. You can see that he's very scared, and that's accurate because, you know, again, it feels very real to the person who's experiencing it. But again, I think they're taking a bit of cinematic license with this, you know, happening around him. And I don't think that, you know, somebody with schizophrenia actually feels that they're in the middle of a car chase and being shot at and whatnot, but the false memories thing plays into it again and feeds the delusion that this kind of happened, and feeds the narrative of this happening. And so he's in full-on psychosis again at this point.
Honey? John. Please, talk to me. Tell me what happened. John, open the door.
So he's come home to his wife, Alicia, after that intense car chase, an intense psychotic experience. And, you know, psychosis is a really, really intense experience. And this is accurate with my experience of it, where, you know, you're in a really, really intense experience that feels very real and very scary. And a lot of times it's too much and you just kind of shut down. And so we saw him do that, where he got home and he just had to go into another room, lock the door, and just sit there, just kind of, you know, taking it all in and kind of trying to regain some semblance of balance. And this was a hard scene to watch because, you know, I saw it from the perspective of Alicia, of his partner. And I've been in his position where I've just shut off to my partner and, you know, shut down like that. And it's clearly very hard for the partner to experience that. And so, you know, watching this movie, I had a conversation with my partner, Rob, and was just kind of like, you know, I'm sorry. Like, I'm sorry. And hopefully depictions like this create greater empathy on both sides in terms of what each person in the relationship is going through.
What do you want?
My name is Rosen. Dr. Rosen. I'm a psychiatrist.
Forgive me if I don't seem persuaded.
I'd like you to come with me, John. Just for a chat.
Appears I have no choice.
Help me! Somebody! Somebody! Help me! Get off me! I know who you are! I know who you are! No. Charles! Charles, the Russians! Charles, the Russians! Call somebody! Call somebody, Charles! The Russians!
Steady the leg.
Get away from me.
Stay away from me!
So, lots going on here, but delusions can be very, very intense. And I think this is kind of accurate in terms of, you know, being really, really scared and wrapped up in the narrative that your mind has created, and being really, really terrified of people who are trying to, you know, kind of exert some control over you, like these mental health professionals who are trying to, you know, restrain him and tackle him to the ground here. And it's really hard to accept help when this is kind of the way you're experiencing the world. And I've come very close to punching psychiatrists and police officers and whatnot in very similar situations. And so, you know, he's not a violent person, but because he's so wrapped up in this and he's trying to, you know, protect himself, he ends up punching the psychiatrist. And then forced medication is also something that I've experienced, where you are, you know, deep in this psychosis and seemingly to the outside eye unruly. And so they forcibly inject you with, you know, calming medication or antipsychotic medication, probably a mixture of the two. And so this is accurate. I don't know maybe this was more common in like the 50s or the 60s or whenever this is happening, but I don't know of a lot of psychiatrists and teams that would kind of approach bringing someone to the hospital like this, where they kind of came into his lecture that he was giving in his place of work. And, that might be a little bit dramatized in the film, but the general idea of being really afraid and resistant to people who are trying to treat you for your psychiatric illness is accurate.
What's wrong with him?
John has schizophrenia. People with this disorder are often paranoid.
But his work, he deals with conspiracies, so.
Yes, I know. In John's world, these behaviors are accepted, encouraged. As such, his illness may have gone untreated far longer than is typical.
So here, John is given the diagnosis of schizophrenia, and it's a shock to his wife Alicia, and I kind of had some reservations about the movie in terms of its accuracy with this, because you would think that the people who are closest to him would have noticed some signs of paranoia or of schizophrenia or whatnot, but they do make the connection that it's his erratic or odd behaviors that he was exhibiting are kind of accepted within the profession that he has, where he's dealing with conspiracies as a part of his job. And so maybe that explains why nobody really noticed, but I don't know. I think that the people around you would have picked up on specific cues a little earlier than they did.
John? You have a visitor. Hi.
So John is out of the hospital now, and his wife had been pregnant when they were, going through that hospitalization. So she has the baby now. They have the baby now. And this is one of his friends that he worked with and from university or college or whatever, coming to visit.
Cigarette? No, thanks. I quit, actually.
Hello.
Hey, John.
You met Harvey?
John, there's,
Relax, it's okay. There's no point in being nuts if you can't have a little fun.
Jesus Christ, John. I should have known.
So I think that's kind of an important aspect, is like humor is often a really good way to cope with, the seriousness of an illness like schizophrenia. And so I think that it's nice that they interjected some levity like that.
So, I was in town giving a workshop. I go back tonight. Bender, he really wanted to stop by and see you. Say hi.
Squeamish? Yeah. I suppose I would be too.
So this is also a nice, or not nice, but it's an accurate portrayal of, losing people in your life because of schizophrenia. People often don't understand or, are afraid of you all of a sudden, or just don't want to be around you because of the illness. And that's a really, really unfortunate thing that I think is largely perpetuated by stigma in society. And so, that's definitely something that we need to work on in order to better support and better help the people who are living with this illness to still have strong social networks.
That's unstuck with me. I'm trying to solve the Riemann hypothesis.
Uh-huh. Oh, yeah?
I figured if I dazzle them, they will have to reinstate me. But it's difficult with medication because they're hard to see the solution.
So, this is a common side effect of medication, is being really foggy and, less able to do the tasks that you were able to do before. And that's definitely something that I've experienced and struggled with too. They're showing that him doing very, very simple math now is very hard, even though he made a career out of advanced mathematics. And so I don't know if it's necessarily that extreme where he would regress that much, but it is a problem on medication in terms of, kind of cognitive impairment.
You know, John, you should go easy. There are other things besides work.
What are they?
So, I mean, loss of identity is also a really big thing to talk about when you're dealing with a diagnosis of schizophrenia because, you know, like we saw there, he's lost his identity around his work and around, you know, mathematics and whatnot. And it becomes really hard to deal with when, you know, you build your identity around who you think you are, and then you go through this very traumatic sequence of events of going through your illness, and then you're left with like kind of some broken pieces sometimes that you have to figure out how to reassemble in a meaningful way. And that can be a really difficult task to undertake. So this was kind of a hard scene to watch because, I mean, it feeds into the fears that I have around having children with my illness. And, you know, I can relate to what he's exhibiting in this scene of just like extreme emotional blunting and, you know, just being kind of lost in not only your thoughts, but just kind of being lost in your despair and in your, you know, your fractured view of the world now. And so I understand how he's feeling in this, and that is accurate. Unfortunately, he had his baby in his lap at the time and was completely oblivious to their crying and whatnot. And, you know, I hope that that's not a reality for a lot of parents with schizophrenia, but I would imagine that it can be. So yeah, that probably is an accurate depiction of something that you might struggle with this illness.
What are you thinking about?
What do people do?
It's life, John. Activities available. Just add meaning.
So, you know, at several points throughout this movie, I'm really impressed with their nuanced depiction of what it's like to live with schizophrenia because, you know, he's just sitting there with overwhelming feelings of like adriftness. And, you know, he's asking his wife, what do people do? And I have said that I don't know how many times to my partner, Rob. And, you know, like, what do people do? Like, what am I supposed to do right now? And just feeling overwhelming feelings of being adrift. And I think when you're struggling with symptoms or when you're struggling with medication and side effects of medication, that can be a really common effect. So he's taking out the garbage right now, and she hears him speaking with someone and, you know, I think assumes that he's interacting with hallucinations again.
Who are you talking to?
Garbage man.
Garbage men don't come at night.
I guess around here they do.
So I like that interjection of levity as well, in terms of, you know, your loved ones being a little bit on high alert sometimes after a major psychotic episode. And, you know, being able to laugh about it, I think, is really, really important. And that's something that I try to interject into my own relationships too, when people are worried about me, or, you know, you have to laugh sometimes at some of the symptoms that you experience.
I'm going to bed.
Good night.
Good night.
So throughout this part of the movie, we've kind of seen him really struggling with side effects of the medication. And so this is totally accurate. A lot of people, you know, get frustrated dealing with the side effects of medication, and they stop taking their medication. And so that's what he's doing here. And his symptoms are coming back, as we can see now.
Narrowed the bomb's location to somewhere on the eastern seaboard. But we haven't been able to pinpoint its exact position. Their codes have grown.
So his psychosis is clearly back now, because he's having these really elaborate hallucinations and delusions again. And again, I think that they're kind of taking cinematic license with, you know, the elaborate world that he's interacting with.
Dr. Rosen said
Rosen. Quack! Schizophrenic break from reality, right? Psychological. Look at me, John.
I think the more times too that you go through psychotic episodes and go through recovery and whatnot, you have better tools to be able to question your hallucinations and delusions, which is kind of what he's exhibiting right now.
We list our personnel. John, I'm sorry you had to go through all this. I've gone to a great deal of trouble to get you back. I can restore your status at Wheeler. I can let the world know what you did. But I need you now, soldier.
I was so scared you weren't real.
So you see him really, really succumbing to his hallucinations and delusions again, which, you know, it's an accurate representation of the slippery slope between stopping your medication and having gradual symptoms come up, and then, you know, falling into the mindset of like, oh, I don't have schizophrenia and I, you know, don't need to take medications. This is the way it should be. And so that's a little accurate. Again, the really elaborate set that they designed was not so much how I experience it. And I think it was more just kind of trying to communicate how real it feels for him. Okay, so he's still in the throes of psychosis, and he tried to bathe their baby without her there, and he started interacting too much with his hallucinations, and the baby almost drowned, and she came and saved it. And she's really scared right now.
You'll go back to the hospital?
John, answer me!
Countless people will die.
Alicia, please, put the phone down.
I can't let that happen.
Yes. Hello. Hi, I need Dr. Rosen. Is he in?
I'm sorry, John.
No! You know what you have to do, Nash. She's too great a risk.
Get away!
I didn't mean to hurt you.
You know, violence is an often talked about thing when it comes to schizophrenia, and I think that this is a good example of how violence can be misconstrued. So, you know, to the outside observer or to his wife even, he just shoved her and their baby into the wall, into the corner. And, you know, that could be seen as a really violent act. But, you know, in his mind, he was trying to protect her from his hallucination who was going to go shoot her in the head. And so in the reality that he was operating within, he wasn't necessarily being violent. He was trying to protect his loved ones. And so I think that this is a really good reason why when we have teams responding to mental health crises, it's really important to send trained mental health professionals who are going to be able to de-escalate things and be able to speak with the person in a constructive way, rather than sending police who are likely only going to respond with equal force. And I think that it's really, really important to have a good understanding of the fact that these people who are in psychosis, in the throes of psychosis, are experiencing a very different reality from what outside observers may be experiencing. And it's really important to empathize with that and try to work with that.
Cannot coexist with Alicia.
Charles and
With Alicia.
I understand.
She never gets old. Marcy can't be real. She never gets old.
So that was a good, kind of cinematic portrayal of how disorienting it can be to be in the midst of psychosis. And then, I'm not sure how accurate it is for him to just have this complete 180 shift to being like, okay, yeah, this is my illness. I am fine. Like, we can talk about this. I don't know how realistic that is. I've never been able to just make that degree of a switch. But again, like I said, the more times you go through a psychotic episode and the more times you go through recovery, the easier it becomes to kind of have that level of insight into what is going on, because you've been there before and you've been through it before. And so there's kind of these little, trigger points that turn on in your head about, signaling that, okay, we've been here before. This is your illness. You can get through this. And so it would really help to have a grounding person who you can kind of talk about that with. So, I'm not sure how accurate it was for him to have that drastic of a mindset change, but it is possible. So that was the last clip that I kind of wanted to show from the movie, but it just kind of continues on by showing the kind of really quick progression of his life as he gets older, and it ends with him being an esteemed professor at the university, and he's taking courses and stuff too, and it ends with him receiving the Nobel Prize for his work on game theory. And so that's kind of the progression that it takes. But now I just want to kind of dive into some key takeaways or key conclusions or thoughts on the accuracy of the movie. Okay, so just a few points that I want to address. So the first one being his level of social awkwardness. So it was kind of endearing throughout the movie, or I thought it was endearing anyway, because I can relate to it. I think that a lot of people who are living with a mental illness like schizophrenia have a certain degree of social awkwardness, whether it's because they're interacting with alternate stimuli in their mind, or because it's just been harder for them to, or for us to, connect with other people. I don't know why it is, but it seems to be kind of common from what the people that I've talked to. Also, their depiction of paranoia was pretty accurate. Like, paranoia can really inflame in your mind and can really, snowball. And so while the hallucinations were probably over dramatized in the movie, the paranoia and the underlying feeling of paranoia was pretty accurate. So along that vein, there was parts of this movie that were definitely sensationalized, where it was just basically an over dramatization of symptoms that he was experiencing and environments that he was finding himself in that were really hallucinations or delusions. And that was kind of over sensationalized in terms of John Nash really only primarily had audio hallucinations. He didn't have very much visual hallucinations. So that was, again, cinematic licensing that they took over representing how real his hallucinations and delusions were to him. Now, that said, I think it was effective in terms of allowing the audience to understand how real it did feel for him. I think another really important thing to be critical of in this movie is how much it romanticized mental illness and romanticized schizophrenia. He is seen as this, you know, this genius. And, you know, I think oftentimes people misattribute genius characteristics to people with schizophrenia, or really creative characteristics to people who are living with schizophrenia. And I think that's, like I mentioned before, kind of a dangerous trope to fall into in terms of, you know, categorizing a group of people a certain way, and also misattributing any, you know, skills they may have as being because of their illness. So it's kind of dangerous both ways you go with it. And I think that, you know, it's really important to understand that schizophrenia affects a really wide array of different people, and it really does not create genius or creativity, and it does not stem from genius or creativity. Also, which kind of led to the romanticization of his experience with schizophrenia, was how they kind of just glossed over his life from the point when he gained insight, like we saw, to his illness and whatnot. From that point where he was kind of, you know, recovering from his second psychotic break, and just kind of glossed over the rest of his life up to the point where he's a really old man or receiving a Nobel Prize. And so they really didn't dig into, and, you know, a movie can only be so long. And so they, you know, they dug in quite thoroughly to hit the period of diagnosis. But it didn't show, you know, what his life looked like when he was trying to figure out how to manage his symptoms effectively and, you know, try to navigate the ups and downs of life while also managing a serious illness like schizophrenia. And, you know, they glossed over parts of John Nash's life, like his divorce from Alicia Nash, who he subsequently remarried later on in life. But, you know, they left that out. And so I think that there is a lot more nuance to his life that could have been represented better. Another thing that I kind of just wanted to draw attention to is kind of the lack of negative symptoms depicted in the movie. The focus is primarily on hallucinations and delusions that he's experiencing, which are the more positive symptoms of schizophrenia. And so it would have been nice to see more representation of the negative symptoms in the movie as well, because that is something that people with schizophrenia struggle with. I don't want to say the most, but that's something that I struggle with the most. And it's something that is quite frequently struggled with for people who are living with schizophrenia. And so we did see hints of it. Like, he had a pretty flat affect throughout the whole movie. And then we saw a glimpse of his emotional blunting when he was sitting just really flat with his baby crying on his lap. I think this is primarily because the negative symptoms don't make for as good of a movie as the positive symptoms do. The positive symptoms are a little bit more sensational and a little bit more visually appealing and whatnot. So that's probably why that happened, but it would have been nice in terms of creating accuracy in the film to see more of the negative symptoms. In terms of the story, I thought it was really interesting how they kind of made it a participatory narrative where they really brought you along on the ride of not really being sure of whether or not his interactions were with hallucinations or whether or not they were real. And that really served to allow the viewer to kind of come along the ride that John Nash was experiencing and that people with schizophrenia experience of, you know, questioning their reality and questioning, you know, what's real, what's not, and really falling into believing that their hallucinations are real. And so I think that they did a good job of showing the audience what it might feel like. And while this did lead to kind of over sensationalizing and over cinematizing aspects of the hallucinations and delusions at times, it did lend itself nicely to allowing the viewer to really be able to understand how real it feels for the person who is experiencing it. So in conclusion, I think that they did a pretty good job in terms of developing the story in a real and relatable way. I also think that they did a good job of showing the audience how it feels for somebody who's living with schizophrenia. So, you know, they really took you along the ride of showing how real it felt for John Nash. I do think that it is severely over-romanticized in terms of how they portrayed, you know, John Nash's life and his experience with the illness and whatnot, and, you know, wrapped it up all pretty with a bow with his Nobel Prize and that kind of thing. And I don't think that that was necessarily an accurate depiction of what it's like to live with the illness, but it made for a good movie. You know, it's really hard to communicate how it feels for a person who's going through an illness like schizophrenia. So considering how difficult it is to convey that in film format, I do think that they did a fairly good job. Okay, so wow, that was a marathon of a video. Thank you so much for sticking through it if you made it this far. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you found this video insightful or, you know, learned something new. If you enjoyed the movie A Beautiful Mind and were wondering if it was accurate or not. Again, these comments are based on my own experiences with the illness, and, you know, people may have different experiences of the illness. They may find the film more accurate or less accurate depending on their own experiences. So this was really commentary based on my own experiences. So if you enjoyed this video, please make sure to like it, comment with your own thoughts on A Beautiful Mind as a film based around schizophrenia. I'd love to know what parts of the film you found to be accurate or inaccurate based on your own experiences. So please make sure to subscribe so as not to miss any new videos that we put out. And if you would like to help support the creation of future videos like this one, please check out our Patreon page. The link is in the description below. We so appreciate any support you give. Thank you again so much for watching this video. And as always, wishing you and your loved ones good health. See you in the next video. Bye.